This is Dr. Fox. Thank you all for your continued support for CRPN and CRPN Central. For more information about our mission, please contact us today at info@crpainnet.com for details.
Listen up, sites. I can't wait for you to see our latest offering for patient recruitment. This new platform is going to identify patients with AI and then help you go through the entire patient screening process. All you have to do is give us access to your EMR and we'll handle the rest. We're going to deliver amazing results and the best potential participants. All free for you, of course. We're going to monetize your data and get payments directly from the sponsor. So what do you have to lose?
I appreciate the offer, but we'll have to decline the solution. You see, our clinic's IT department has strict rules on who accesses our EMR. We don't want to be hacked and sued for data privacy breaches. Plus, we've worked with teams like this before. The specialists looking at these protocols may know how to look at inclusion and exclusion, but they rarely know protocol and medical records, and this makes us have to work and rework all the leads they give.
I never thought about it like that. Our advisory groups thought this was a great idea. We also have some amazing development in our financial models. Sponsors pay us to provide you with a portal to enter all of your invoices and self-serve your own remittances. You simply log in, enter your information into our version of invoices, and send. It's really that simple.
You do realize this will add a totally new logistic to our site and yet another one of the dozens of portal logins we have to manage to perform this trial. And because not all of our trials run through this one technology, it's yet another system we are going to have to log in and out of. Plus, every time we have to work on a trial with this kind of technology, there's never a way to actually speak to someone when there's a problem. And it never updates during protocol amendments. I'm sorry, but we'll have to charge more in overhead just to manage your simple financial solution because of the extra administrative burden at the site side.
Yeah, we never thought about it like that, and the sponsors love the idea. It seemed to help them stay organized and efficient. Okay, you raise really good points, so I'll be sure to take that back to the team. But what about feasibility? We have this amazing solution that's already blessed by some of the biggest sponsors in the industry. You enter your data and it creates workflows to make sure everything is filed accordingly. It's simply amazing. Get it?
Yes, we know about this one. It brings all of the convenience to the sponsor at the cost of the site. Hours and hours are spent trying to get all of our stakeholders organized without the appropriate delegation permissions. And we find it more than triples our time and risks submitting regulatory documents before legal agreements are signed. And on top of it all of this work isn't even paid for, and we risk losing a ton of resources completing these risky and cumbersome surveys. Thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah, we never thought about it like that.
You say that a lot. It seems to me you haven't thought about our perspective at all. Maybe you're developing solutions without the right stakeholders in the conversation. We appreciate everything you're trying to do, but it's only making it worse. We're going to stick to the processes we know and the ones that we are part of creating.
So many ideas to help improve clinical research, and yet so many flops, fizzles, and abandonments. Clinical research is complex with many stakeholders and subject matter experts, and yet I'm not quite sure everyone who depends on the solutions we make had the opportunity to contribute their perspectives. Sites. If something doesn't work for you, you must speak up. Nothing will get better unless we share our experiences. And you will never be punished if you share your challenges with positive and collaborative intentions. Sponsors, you are likely approached daily by the next new shiny thing that will save you time and money. Before you invest millions in hopes of a promising ROI, it may be a good idea to understand if this solution has passed the site-facing stress test. If it was developed blindly, it may end up buried in the technology graveyard with all of the other great ideas that didn't consider those who use it, especially the sites. Welcome to CRPN Central, the official podcast of the Clinical Research Payment Network. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Fox. CRPN Central discusses the real issues with our clinical research industry to explore and identify mutually beneficial solutions for all of our stakeholders. You'd think an industry whose sole purpose is to create and develop new and innovative ways to care for patients would be amazing at innovative solutions to accomplish its objectives. However, we continually see solutions intended to solve problems fail, leading only to further disparities between what we can do with technology and efficiency and what we are actually doing every day in the industry. How do we approach development and foster innovations to be successful in such a complex industry environment? Today's episode will discuss innovations and their integrations into the clinical research industry, defined as the new methods, ideas, and products created by clinical research professionals to accomplish improved and efficient clinical trial operations and deliverables for the betterment of industry stakeholders, intermediates, and end users. First, we will speak with a solution expert dedicated to fully understanding the needs of our clinical sites. Then, we will speak with an innovational subject matter expert who has created entire systems around innovation developments. To maintain valid comparisons, both interviews will use the same questions, and my guests did not know the questions before the interviews. We will regroup after the interviews to compare our guests' opinions and perhaps identify how we as an industry can develop and foster lasting innovations for optimal improvements. Our first guest founded and created some of our industry's greatest site-centric software solutions. Henry Kravchenko is the founder and CEO of Clinically, a software company dedicated to optimal and customizable eReg and eSource site services. Henry is an experienced software developer who came from finance and hedge fund industries, and he is working with his team to create innovative and holistic solutions that meet the needs of all of our industry stakeholders. Henry is a member of CRPN's board of advisors. He's a brilliant conversationalist, and I'm so very thankful he has taken the time to speak with us today. Please welcome with me Mr. Henry Kravchenko. Henry Kravchenko, thank you so much for coming on to CRPN Central today.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Fox. It's my pleasure to be here.
For those of us who do not yet know Henry, could you give us a brief introduction?
Sure. My name is Henry Kravchenko. I founded Clinically in 2019, and we launched our first product in 2020. Now we have two products. We have a eReg and an eSource product. We are focused solely on sites. Folks doing the research are our primary, secondary, and tertiary stakeholders. There's no others. Also, we are not born out of sites. We are a technology company, and we admit that there's a lot that we don't know. And rather than trying to figure things out or come up with the next amazing shiny thing, the approach that we're taking is we are going out to the practitioners, to the sites themselves, to the folks doing research who are in the trenches, and we are asking them, what are your problems? What are your challenges? And then we are applying our technology know-how to resolve those challenges. And lo and behold, that combination, technology skills, admitting that you don't know everything, and then finding the subject matter experts, the practitioners, that combination is gold, and it's working incredibly well, and it's incredibly enjoyable to put out products or services that are helping the situation.
There are sites in my network that work very closely with Clinically. Across the country, these sites have never talked to each other before, but they tell me the same, that Clinically listens to us, they understand what we need, and they work to get the job done. You've visited sites before, right?
Oh yes, 100%.
You're on the grounds, looking at a site, asking them what they need, and then you're doing something about it.
Yeah, and I'm still shocked that this is a novel idea in this industry. Why doesn't everybody do this? Because it makes so much sense. It saves us a ton of time. Let's deliver better products faster without the waste of iterating over ideas that don't make sense in the field. Prior to this, I was in financial services. And when I was looking like, what do I want to do when I grow up type of thing, I kind of stumbled onto clinical research. I think most people stumble onto it. Like, it's not a track you pursue. I was speaking to site owners. I was lucky enough to be put in touch with several site owners. And it almost felt like they talked to each other and basically said, Henry's about to call you. Just tell him that XYZ is broken. Every single site that I spoke to had the same exact. I wanted to call back the first one. I'm like, did you just call that person before I spoke to them and just tell them what to say? Sites do talk to each other. It was almost verbatim. I'm like, what is going on here? This can't be right. Then this one site owner put me in touch with another site owner, and like they're all kind of talking about the same challenges. And initially I didn't believe it. How could these challenges still exist? Like, it's 2019. This can't be right. And then they all kind of said the same exact thing. Like, okay, so I guess this is an actual thing that needs to be addressed.
And ironically, in an industry dedicated to advancing new and and novel things. We are facing some of these weird, archaic challenges, but we're developing the latest in technology for healthcare.
It's exactly what I tell folks, people that are not in the industry. It's like this dichotomy. You're splicing genes and cloning sheep, but then you're writing down the results on carbon copy paper and faxing it to each other. How does it make any sense? You're literally at the cutting edge mRNA clinical research that saved the world. But folks were still recording results on paper and faxing it to each other. How could this be the case? There's not a legal barrier or a regulatory barrier. The FDA is very clear. They want you to use electronic systems. It's a thing. Somehow the practitioners, the researchers, they're kind of hesitant or they're risk averse about adopting new systems. Rightfully so, because the systems out in this industry aren't up to par. Because you look at systems in a consumer, in finance, in any other vertical, they're light years ahead. So of course they want the same in this industry, which makes sense, and that doesn't exist.
Today's topic is clinical research innovations. Not necessarily the innovations that we develop for our patients, but clinical research innovations that we develop for our own progress. In clinical research, how do you define an innovation?
That's such a great question. The question that we sometimes internally or clinically kind of toss around is this revolutionary or is this evolutionary? Revolutionary, is this innovation, innovative, or is this just an iteration? Is this an evolution? In tech speak, it's revolutionary versus evolutionary. That's how you kind of look at systems. And what am I doing here? Am I iterating or am I really revolutionizing things? Our goal is to be revolutionary, to be innovative. Are we basically taking a physical problem, like a paper-based problem, let's say for regulatory, and then are we making it an electronic problem and maybe with some improvements, and that would be evolutionary, it's a baby step, or are we taking a physical real-world problem and applying digital technology to solve it in a way that reduces the burden of paperwork, of the administrative burden, reduces mistakes, so helps kind of streamline the process of whatever the process might be, and ideally takes the person doing this, takes them out of the equation so that the system can do that. In clinical research, what I found is that folks are incredibly detail oriented and they're really good at doing these complex processes over and over to the point where it's really genuinely impressive. I don't think you'd find that in other industries. But the reason you wouldn't find that in other industries is because they apply technology to solve that so that so people can concentrate on the focus on the higher order work. Nobody went to school so they can shuffle papers around. Like your nurse practitioners, your PIs, they didn't go to grad school and spend a decade in school just so they can sign paperwork and file documents. Can we apply technology to do these tasks? Which technology, like computers, are really, really good at repetitive tasks. Humans are not. By definition, we are not. Even though in this industry, I think they kind of skews towards better at repetitive, complicated tasks.
Lots of practice.
I would never be able to do a study coordinator's job. I would be fired 100%. I am not good at these repetitive, complex, multi-step processes that have to be completed each time accurately and exactly as prescribed by the protocol. I would lose my job within a week.
When you talked about the revolutions and the evolutions that we have, do you feel as though both revolution and evolution could be an innovation?
I would define an innovation as an improvement on an existing process or system or approach, but basically an improvement on the status quo. And of course, now there's different degrees of innovation. Any improvement, ultimately something that helps either the individual do their job faster, more accurately, or perhaps eliminates the repetitive, mundane tasks and allows them to focus on the higher order tasks. Anything that improves anything existing would be an innovation.
And even the smallest step. And sometimes I feel like the innovations may not even be detectable at first, but it's just those small accumulations. It's also ironic, but sometimes I wonder if the accumulation of innovations that are not coordinated actually create some form of degradation to the process.
Yeah, it's the law of unintended consequences.
That might be like what we see in portal logins, where all these innovations come together, but they're not really coordinated.
So yes, a bunch of not thought out or not coordinated innovations could lead to an overall degradation, and the portals is a perfect example. And why does that happen? Part of it is the individuals or the companies and organizations building these systems, they don't necessarily consider what role they're playing in the larger ecosystem. I hope we don't do this, but I'm sure to some extent we do. Folks think, well, we are the best in this one thing, so people will use us for this. They won't need to do these other things. These other things are not my problem because we are killing it as one vertical. But that's just not how life works. Ultimately, you can't be everything for everybody, and you just have to admit that you solve one obstacle, one challenge really well, and then people have to use other systems to address other challenges, and you have to kind of play nice, work with those other systems, or allow your end users to somehow work with those other systems in a seamless manner, because maybe you've solved one problem, but now if they have to log into one portal to solve this problem, then take data out of your portal to put into another portal and then another portal and then and vice versa. Yes, you've solved some problems, but you've also created a bunch of other ones. So net, you're not 80% better. You're only maybe 20% better. And then there's also additional frustrations that come along with that. So where are we going with this? At the end of the day, why do you have 65 different logins? Like, why do you have to have 65 different passwords? Well, for one thing, there's no one way to identify yourself on the internet. But Microsoft solved that. Google solved that. Okta. There's a few other ones that solved that identity thing. Folks don't want to integrate with those systems for whatever reason because they think they're going to be the identity provider for you, or they can do it better somehow, which is, again, that's not the case. Like Google, Microsoft, the resources that they have at their disposal, you can't compete with that. If they've come up with something that works well, that let's say 25 million people in the world use, you probably should consider it. And if you did consider it, then Dr. Fox might only have 1 or 2 logins. You still have 65 portals, but you might only have 2 passwords you might need to remember. So it's first principles, basically. So folks don't necessarily think about, why am I doing this? They're like, okay, I have a problem. I'm going to solve it by writing a lot of code and I'm going to release it and it's going to be great. But like, slow down. Is this genuinely the optimal approach? Like, what are the side effects of what I'm doing?
And it seems like that dissociation, the siloing, even the consideration, the assumption that everyone will rely on your solution, that could just doom an innovation. How could everyone be expected to be working under the same set of rules under a single organization when there's so much demand? It's like expecting everyone in the world to go to the same convenience store.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The example that I like to use is that very often my wife and I can't agree on what to have for dinner. There's 2 of us and we can't come to an agreement. So why do you think that 750 different stakeholders are all going to come together and agree that we're going to do this thing this way and no deviation? This is it. That's not how the world works. You have to just appreciate that there are nuances, like how you run your business. It might be very different how somebody else runs their business. At the end of the day, as long as you're complying with federal regulations, how you comply with them is entirely up to you. Additionally, if you're doing oncology versus device versus infectious disease, you will naturally have different needs to run your business. For everybody in those different indications, say like, okay, we're going to do exactly this. By definition, you'll create inefficiencies because the person doing device studies does not need the infrastructure for oncology and vice versa. Net, you're going to end up creating these inefficiencies that we discussed, these unintended consequences to your innovative idea that you've maybe spent an incredible amount of time trying to get everybody to agree on. It falls apart because you shouldn't have to agree on things. This is where technology plays a key role. If you need to do something a certain way, it's my job to accommodate you and in a way that doesn't disrupt somebody else's business. And that's where technology is easy. That's how it's built. That's what it does well. It's flexible. It's malleable. If you do it in the right way, you can solve multiple problems without increasing the complexity to any of the stakeholders and then giving them autonomy in how they use your product.
Going back to your analogy of like those 750 stakeholders. So let's say all 750 stakeholders decide to go to a different restaurant. Odds are every single one of those restaurants they went to will take the same type of credit card. They can all get the services that they want and they can still speak in a language that can pay for it. Across all the different businesses, you still have this universal language of getting the job done.
Right.
And maybe in that analogy, that could be something that we could try to get done in clinical research. We can have some kind of a uniformity about how we're going to conduct business across all of our businesses.
What you're describing now, it's called a protocol in technology. That's how the internet works. Department of Defense created the internet, created the protocol TCP/IP, and look what happens. Now we have the World Wide Web because they didn't try to dictate. It didn't work because it was just too big of a thing, so it escaped effectively. There was a time in the 90s where different companies tried to create their own like protocols, and it didn't work because people wanted to talk to each other. They wanted to scale. They wanted to collaborate, and ultimately we settled on the TCP/IP protocol or HTTP protocol, and just giving people the foundation, they were able to then innovate and then build the tools that we have now. HTTP grew, standard of living grew. You can access any information you want anywhere in the world. We don't have to agree on these grand scheme things. We just need to agree on the foundation. This is what we're going to call a protocol, or this is what we're going to call something. And as long as we can just agree on the basics, then let companies innovate and build on top of that, and like great things happen.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. We talked about what dooms the innovation in our industry. That's siloing, the people who have this misunderstanding of dependence on their technology. And then we brought up an example like the internet or a lot of these other massive innovations. These are really the revolutions that we're talking about. What do you think makes a good innovation in the clinical research industry?
Wow, that's such a great question. What makes a good innovation? If you're solving a problem, solve that problem. Don't build a framework to authenticate people. Let's say we need to randomize people. It's a randomization app. It doesn't need to upload documents. It doesn't need to have a chat feature. Or even if you do for some reason need a chat feature, there's a million chat software out there. Just pick one. And I bet you whichever software you pick, guess what? It's going to be able to talk to Zoom. Zoom and Teams and Google Chat. So all of a sudden, folks don't need to log into your app to be able to talk to people because they can use the app that they enjoy, that they like the most. So don't reinvent the wheel. Focus on the thing that you do well, and then figure out who does other things well, and then integrate with them or collaborate with them.
That makes sense. You don't want to water down your innovation. Focus on that one thing, build off of what someone else has helped to do, and become more efficient. I also like the stories that you talk about clinically, where you're understanding the problem holistically. Scope, you're going to the site and understanding it from all perspectives, not just the one based off the problem that you're trying to solve. What inspired you to take that route? That's not very standard to go and investigate this problem.
What's the saying? The need is the mother of invention. I don't know research, but I spoke to enough folks to get a sense that there are inefficiencies there that technology is perfectly suited to address. That's also how I work, even in financial services. I went to school, like I'm an engineer by training, but I learned about hedge funds and derivatives and all kinds of exotic investments because I enjoy learning about these things, because then you're able to apply your skills, technology, to truly apply your technology. And clinical research is the same exact thing. But ultimately, just pretend you don't know. Even if you think you know something, just pretend you don't know anything. Just let the people that do the work tell you. I've learned so much. This field is incredible. It's amazing. I had no idea how drugs come to market. It's ignorant of me to think that I take all these drugs. I never thought about, well, how did this actually get here? How do I know it's not going to kill me tomorrow? Like, now I know. There's a process. It works. It's a scientific, rigorous method that works. If you just take a minute, read up on it, there's no better way to do it.
And it's constantly evolving and adapting.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a really good answer, is just to know that you don't know everything, to almost recognize what you don't know and then try to fill in those gaps. Try to learn what you don't know.
Right.
It seems like common sense, but sometimes you've got these programmers, they're really good at what they do, and they can build these beautiful things, but they're building blindly if they don't fully understand the problem that they are trying to solve.
Yeah, just admit you don't know everything, as you said.
And you have to be kind of humble. There's a lot of very type A personalities in research who consider admitting what they could consider a fault or a limitation. They think that's a bad thing because they're trying to project this image. I'm very smart. I'm very good at what I do. And so they don't necessarily take that step to say, this is what I don't know, and this is what I need to find out. I'm human.
Part of the frustration with technology in this industry, or the lack of good technology in this industry, I think comes from exactly that. Folks in this industry, the researchers, the scientists, they know their industry incredibly well, but they also think that because they know that well, they know how to apply technology to it well. What I find often is that when I have conversations with sites, or I'm on panels or in groups, sites, the practitioners end up discussing, how do we solve this with technology, and like what kind of technology and how it should work. And the second you go there, you lost. Like, it's game over, because now you're outside of your comfort zone. Like, you don't know what you're talking about, or not as much as you do about your core competencies. Then if you try to impose that on somebody, like either hire a technologist or get your vendors to do exactly that, the way you think should be done, it doesn't work as well, because there's just things that you just don't know how that works. I mean, like, let's flip that. If I come to you and tell you how to run your business, and I think you should do this way and that way, you would laugh me out of the room. That conversation would be a very, very short conversation.
It happens all the time between sites and sponsors and CROs.
Yes, it's interesting to hear you say that, because I hadn't considered this, but yeah, you're right. It's not just technology. It really happens everywhere in clinical research. Different stakeholders dictate to each other how they should do what they're being hired to do. Like, do I tell my bank how to run a bank? Like, no, what the hell?
So what happens is we have global industries coming to our local sites, and they have this mindset. I have oversight over 100 sites. I have 100 times the visibility of you. Therefore, my mentality, my thought, my views are better than yours. You will conform to my views because I know more. And so since they are kind of putting themselves at a global level, looking down on local sites, literally, the local sites just look at them and say, you don't know me. What works for this site on the other side of the country does not work for me. And so then there's this really big disconnect between the global partnerships and the local group.
So I'm also laughing because it's actually happening right now with one of our customers.
It happens on a legal level. Sometimes they bake things into legal, and it just wouldn't work at a site. And the people like CROs, sponsors, they just don't get it.
Now, do you think part of that is the larger global organizations, they're trying to standardize and they're just overshooting in a way?
Yes, you can see that all of the time in contracts. How many times has a CRO sent a contract to a site and said, everything's password protected. You are not allowed to change the CTA. You must sign it as is or provide us with a thesis for the reasons why you need to change it. They try to standardize to save costs for them at the cost of the local site, and the local site's lawyers who are bending over backwards saying there's no way we can agree to this because this does not conform with our local policy. Trying to standardize a bunch bunch of independent contractors into a single route. It's
I
crazy.
appreciate the scale that the large pharma or large CROs have to operate at. At the same time, you're over standardizing. Instead of working on the protocols, you're trying to get everybody to agree to eat at the same restaurant. It just doesn't work. So they over standardize. And as a result, any efficiency you might have gained from that standardization is lost because now your study's delayed. You're spending tons of money on legal fees, both sides. The site has to obviously bump up their budget because they know it's going to cost them more. And same thing on the CRO side, they have to pay their lawyers more because ultimately there's going to be discrepancy, there's going to be disagreements. And why? Because you decided to over standardize. If you agree that there are nuances, you're talking the same language. Same thing in technology, same exact thing. It's vendors trying to over innovate in a way. And as a result, it doesn't work.
Over management, over assumption creates massive disconnects between the innovations in clinical research and their targeted problems, which just creates even more problems.
Yeah, 100%.
If I were to hand you the microphone and I were to say, how would you successfully indoctrinate innovations in clinical research? And what would you like to tell to all of those solution providers out there trying to do this? What would you say?
From the site's perspective, the end user perspective, I would say focus on the things that you need, not how you want those things done. You have a challenge, you need that challenge addressed. That's the thing that you should be communicating to your vendors, not how to do the problem, how to solve this problem, but this is the problem. From the vendor perspective, I would argue focus on your core competency and just improve that. There's something that you're good at, something that people are paying you money for, because so people speak with their wallets generally. So if people are paying you for it, that's probably valuable. How do I focus on that? How do I deliver the maximum possible value? Now, from the business perspective, it might not make a lot of sense. Maybe it makes more sense to focus on a bunch of different things and have several revenue streams. But ultimately, from the innovation perspective, focus on your core competency, like deliver that, and the market will reward you. That's been proven over and over in so many different industries.
I loved the internet analogy. We all tried to do our own thing until we didn't. And then all of a sudden, we literally changed the world.
Microsoft was a huge player and they tried to create their own protocol and push it on everybody. And even with all their might in the 90s, and they were huge, they were the biggest player, it was them and IBM, they still couldn't contain it because there was so much value they were trying to coop up and it just didn't work. And I think same thing will happen in research. Ultimately, sites, tech vendors will realize like, I don't need to solve everything for everybody. I can focus on the things that I do well and kind of an amazing business. I can just deliver a ton of value and let somebody else focus on these other things that they might do well. And I'll have happier customers, I'll have happier employees because my customers aren't complaining to them all the time. And net, there's just a ton of value that gets unlocked.
That focus on specialization, being the very best of something, and depending on someone else in the ecosystem to take care of something else. If we all get really good at something, we can bring each other up.
Yes, 100%.
I love it. Henry, thank you so much for coming on to CRPN Central. A wonderful conversation. I look forward to sharing
Thank you very much for having me, Dr. Fox. It's my pleasure.
I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Our next guest has worked in clinical research and developed innovations in site and sponsor roles for over a decade. Michelle Shogren is the founder and CEO of Innovate in What You Do, a company dedicated to helping our industry's best create and deliver successful innovative technologies. Michelle has worked at Bayer for over 14 years, and then she dedicated her skills and her passions to successfully bring new and innovative practices for the perfect foundation for Innovate in What You Do, to help our industry's professionals think differently for innovative tomorrows. I've had the honor and the privilege of collaborating with Michelle, and I'm so very thankful she has taken the time to speak with us today. Please welcome with me Miss Michelle Shogren. Michelle Shogren, thank you so much for coming on to CRPN Central today.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you very much, Dr. Fox, for having me.
Would you be willing to tell the audience about you?
Sure, happy to. I have a passion for helping people, especially patients, and it's down to my core ever since I was probably 10 years old. I started in the world of clinical trials maybe accidentally as a patient in a clinical trial when I was 18, and then I did another one at 22, but I really fell into it when I started working at sites, and I did that for about 9 years. I was a coordinator, a site director, marketing director, all of those fun things, and got to exponentially grow the amount of people I could help instead of just the patients in front of me, all the ones that were connected to the clinical trials. And then I jumped the fence because I had to move just for life and went to work for a CRO. And then I went to work for Bayer which is a pharma company. And I did that CRO for about a year. And then I was at Bayer for about 14 years. And during that time, I was constantly bringing in what I knew from the site side of things and where they needed help and how we could work better together. And then also some of the experience I had from the CRO into what we did. And once I realized that we needed more voices at the table at the same time to really innovate, I decided to leave Bayer and I started my own company called Innovate in What You Do. And that's exactly what I get to do every day. So it's like my dream job, being able to help companies innovate with all the different users in mind and trying to bring all those voices to the table so that we can have things that really can be adopted and bring things to patients who need it faster.
Michelle, you are literally a professional innovator.
My whole life, yes.
What does Innovate in What You Do offer?
So we have 3 different parts to the company. We have the first part, which is innovation consulting. There's a lot of either sites that are out there or vendors or solution providers out there, and they don't know what happens behind the veil of a pharma company. Sometimes they want to understand better, like what's really going on there? Why am I hitting the roadblocks or the hurdles that I'm hitting? Or what can I expect for processes? And how can I do better here? There's also the chance of saying, how can I improve what I'm doing, my way of working, whether that's running the site or running their company or their solutions. There's also pharma companies who need help and they want to understand better, what does a site need? What does the solution provider need? Why do we have trouble interacting with those people? That's the consulting part, where it's just a whole lot of talking and recommending that they actually talk to those people and not to me. And then we get to the real bigger piece of it, where they get to do that through our workshops and user voice activities that we run. We run lots of opportunities to get interactive, hands-on, talk and brainstorm together, to identify problems together and get real clear feedback. And then the last piece, we do education, because we're hoping that maybe you don't need us. Maybe you're just going to use these skills in your day-to-day work.
So, Michelle, you created a company designed to produce successful innovations.
Exactly. And it'll work in any industry, honestly, but my passion, my heart, my soul is here.
Today's episode is strictly about innovation disconnects. So we're going to do a deep dive into innovations themselves. I'm going to ask you a few questions. I've already asked another interviewer the same question. And once we're done, we're going to compare the answers and see if there's any similarities or differences in the responses of some of our industry's biggest experts in innovation.
Sounds so fun. I'm excited.
How do you define innovations in clinical research industries?
I don't think it has to be in clinical research. When you define an innovation, it's going to be something that provides value, first of all. If there's no value, we don't need it. Why change? It has to be somehow creative and it has to approach an unmet need. If that need is already being met fully and completely, there's no need for something else that's there. If we add to it in clinical research, now we're going to be talking more along that's probably also going to affect some of our main key metrics that we have in clinical research, which could be time to market, quality. Speed is a big thing, but quality is even bigger. So if it affects one of those 2 things, that's also going to make a big difference.
That brings a lot of memories for me from my days of writing patents in innovation. And one of the things that you have to do on a patent stress test is you have to test novelty. Do you think that innovations have to be novel?
No, actually I don't, because there's a huge difference between invention and innovation. Invention means it's a brand new thing. Innovation means that you took that brand new thing, and you could start with an invention and make it into an innovation and it all be you. But the invention is the brand new thing. The innovation is where you take that and you make it scalable and also cost effective and implementable. If it's not those 3 things, you also don't have an innovation.
Sometimes we see that these are really great ideas, but when we try to apply them to the scale of the industry as a whole, they just don't make it. They have to be scalable. Otherwise, it just doesn't help everyone. And I would imagine when you work with multiple stakeholders across the table, that fine line of trying to make it fully scalable to meet the needs of everyone is a very fine line to cross.
Yeah, and you will never meet the needs of everyone. So that's another thing that we have to stop saying we need 100% for things, but you should be able to meet the majority. I really believe most of what we are seeing now happen in this paradigm shift of clinical trials is really not in the implementation phase yet. We're still in the incubation phase. We're still trying to figure out how to get this stuff to work and to meet all those things to really be an innovation.
Can you explain your phases of innovation?
Absolutely. Innovate in What You Do is based on this innovation framework. So if you imagine a Roman pillar structure, we're going to have 4 pillars. Above that, it's going to say innovation, because that's what we're holding up. That's our umbrella. The first pillar is going to have intention. This is where you have to set up the infrastructure. You really need to make sure that you start out with understanding why you are changing in the first place, because if you don't understand that, none of the rest matters. The next piece is going to be your ideation. This is where you come up with new ideas, which most people equate to ideation, but it actually is a step before that, where it's problem identification. Because remember, to have innovation, we should be solving an unmet need. So what is that unmet need? Make sure we understand what we're dealing with. Then we have the incubation one, which is what I just referenced, which is where you take that idea and you mature it and you learn more and you test it and you make iterations and pivots based on how users are going to interact with it. And then finally, you're going to have your implementation pillar. And this is going to be when you get ready to pitch for it. And then how do you roll it out to make a successful launch? And how do you measure adoption to know when it's really, truly a new way of working and not just living in Pilotville? But the most important thing of this whole pillar structure we're talking about is the foundation of it. Just like innovation goes all the way across the top, all the way along the bottom is change management and user voice. And that's a big problem. A lot of people have that only under implementation. That's where they start talking about change management. They throw stuff over at sites or at pharma companies and say, here, this is your new way of working. Good luck. Catch it if you can. And all the pillars fall over because there's no foundation under them.
And if I recall correctly, you called that the change management pig, right?
A muddy pig.
The muddy change management pig. What do you think makes a good innovation?
The best innovations are ones that come where you've analyzed who's going to touch this new way of working and actually spent the time to say, okay, these are my users. These are what they're going to do with it. And this is what I call it the burden quotient is for each of them. When we learn something new, say I'm trying to learn how to speak Chinese, I know while I'm learning it, it's going to stink. But once I know it, I know it. It's no more work anymore. So my burden quotient for learning Chinese is just that amount of time it takes me to learn it. The problem is some of the new things that we're trying to do with clinical trials, that burden quotient isn't just when we try to learn it. It continues on. We're having to deal with it over and over and over. So if your burden quotient lasts too long or the benefits don't outweigh the burden, then you're not going to have a successful innovation. Once you learn it, it should be able to move on its own or be easy or second nature for you.
Do you ever find that there may be an imbalance of burden quotient to all of the stakeholders within the innovation?
So it's not unusual for people to carry a different amount of weight of a new solution and a different amount of burden at some point in time. But again, we should all get to the point where it's not heavy anymore. It's because we've built up our muscles by learning. If all of a sudden, say we have 4 different users and 3 of the users are pretty easy burden, but one poor user is now carrying the brunt of it, they're going to get tired faster. They're going to get hurt more often. They're going to have injuries, everything that you can think of. Now, their injuries might not be a broken arm. Their injury might be burnout or frustration or ready to break or snap at you. That's going to be a huge problem. And if that person falls off, then it's no longer stable anymore. You have to make sure that you can even it out as much as possible and that there's enough support for the ones that might have to carry additional burden while they're doing that.
When you do your burden quotients, are there ever like backup plans?
Absolutely. That's why the incubation pillar is so important. The sad situation is that we don't typically do the incubation pillar right now. People get so excited about an idea, they just want to implement it. And they say, okay, this sounds like a great idea. Let's just throw it out there and see what happens. And sometimes they think their pilot that they're running is the incubation period. But really, if you do a healthy incubation cycle, you have a chance to see what are going to be the problems. You de-risk as much as possible before you go live. And then that way you can create all those help tools that they need.
Isn't that ironic in an industry where we specialize in testing a theory, making sure it's safe, and then scaling it up? Could you imagine what would happen if we ran our clinical trials like we did our innovations and we had a phase 2 first in human, it looks great, and then we just scale it off to a phase 4 without anything else?
I know, it's insane. And that's the other funny thing that I even have to have this conversation with people in a scientific industry. The scientific method tells us you have a hypothesis, you test the hypothesis, you iterate on the hypothesis, and then it's actually true now. So why don't they get this? I don't know.
What do you think just absolutely dooms an innovation?
If it's those 3 things that we talked about aren't there. So if they're not cost effective, if they're not implementable, and if they're not scalable, a lot of those things can be mitigated. And I think that's the important piece too, is trying to figure out what your risks are. And then do you want to accept those risks or can you mitigate those risks? Or do you need to iterate to skip them all together or pivot and try again? It takes a little bit of time to do that. It takes talking to people to do that. And you can't do it with somebody else in mind. Doctors will say, I'm doing this with the patients in mind. I see patients every day. I know exactly what they need. Or sponsor companies will say, I'm doing this with the sites in mind. I talk to sites every day. I know what they need. It doesn't work that way. The way that a doctor talks to a patient, the patient's telling them specific things just about that interaction. Sites are telling them, sponsor companies or CROs, specific things just about that interaction. You really need to talk to them about this topic, this specific topic. You can't just guess based on your past experiences.
When you do these workshops, do you have people from across the industry coming into a workshop to share, incubate, brainstorm their new and novel ideas?
Absolutely. That's the whole point of it, is to be able to bring people to the same page. It's really important to set the stage properly that this is not a sales opportunity. This is a learning and education opportunity. It's not an easy thing to do, really, because you have to create a vulnerable situation, but make it feel safe. And you need to create it where someone doesn't get defensive with someone else saying that their product or their baby or their idea is bad, because it probably is. That's why we're here. There's going to be things that need fixed. So you got to be prepared to hear it. And you can't be like, oh, but it's wonderful because of X, Y, and Z. You have to be able to take it. Just sit there and take it and ask questions and learn more, and then synthesize it afterwards, not defend it as you go.
That question, what dooms an innovation? Do you think that just from what you've seen, it could be being closed-minded?
Absolutely. Or thinking your way is the right way. Everybody else must be wrong because I couldn't possibly be wrong. Or I know this has so much value, so I don't want to hear that somebody else doesn't. Or they're just lazy. I hate that one too. I have seen some really good, innovative things that just needed to be tweaked some. They were not willing to tweak it because they thought that the reason it wasn't being adopted was because the receiver was lazy and didn't want to change. That is usually not the situation.
There's something called founder syndrome. Founder syndrome is the bias of a founder when their innovation technology company, whatever it is that they founded, is scrutinized, or they want to fully justify every waking second that they've exerted into this company. And so therefore they have a bias against making it different from what they had envisioned. It takes a really strong person to keep an open mind, to listen, and to really consider adapting and flexing their vision so that it can be better.
Absolutely. It's kind of like mama bear syndrome. Don't mess with my baby because mama bear is going to get you. Don't poke the bear. One of the people who used to work for me, they said, I don't know how you do what you do, because I would constantly ask my team, how are we doing? How am I doing? What could I do better as a leader for you? What do we need to change to make the team stronger? What do I need to change to make the team stronger? And they're like, I've never had a manager do that before, because it's really hard to hold a mirror up to yourself and admit that maybe something needs to change or could change to make something even better. But one of the biggest psychology hacks to that is to realize it doesn't mean that you are really bad to begin with. It just means that you have an opportunity to be even better. And if we can use that mind shift change and that narrative change with leaders who are in that situation, the founder's syndrome situation you were talking about, that can open those doors. So it's also, how do we talk to each other? How do we talk with respect and nonviolent communication sometimes to get better results?
Do you adopt objective and key results when you develop your organization?
Yes.
How often do you assess, reassess, and readjust where you're going with your organization?
Personally, I am assessing every month to see how I'm doing. Rule of thumb, maybe every quarter or every 6 months, depending on how big your organization is, how long it's been there, what you're doing, what your products are. But I do it every month. And I love the OKRs. I'm so glad that you brought up OKRs instead of KPIs, because when you're talking about key performance indicators, you can use metrics that actually don't help you. They can hurt you. But OKRs always set you up for success. With innovation, you have to have the freedom to fail as well. So your objectives and your key results can give you that freedom to fail, but also you got to learn too. You don't just get to fail. You have to learn from it. But if you do learn from it, you're still moving in a good path. With a KPI, if you fail, it doesn't matter if you learn from it, you're just done.
Yeah, it's just a metric. Innovations can utilize OKRs so that they can continuously pivot and adapt to the innovations that are needed.
And you should have that as part of your OKR. You should say, this is my objective. This is the key result that I'm expecting to come from meeting this objective. And if I'm not getting this key result, then I have an iteration plan. And then you should know what things trigger an iteration, which means a small adjustment or a tweak, what things maybe trigger a pivot, which says, okay, we have to have a wider swing here because this is really not going on path at all, or I misunderstood something that happened, whether that's my user or my marketing plan or communication plan or something like that. Maybe you have a pivot. There's also the archive option. Sometimes, unfortunately, you might have to say, okay, maybe this just doesn't go forward. I don't ever use termination because I think there's always a chance you might be able to pick something up and dust it off from the archives and bring it back again if something changes along the way. So I love archive instead of a termination or an endpoint. You should have that as part of your OKR ahead of time. Also, setting success factors and then setting those IIAs to go along with them.
And success factors, is that the risk assessment measurement where you can have aspirational objectives versus controlled objectives? And then you could adjust your risk accordingly. Innovations and OKRs go hand in hand because it really helps you to direct your innovation into a path for success. Given all of these wonderful discussions, why do you think our industry's innovations are so disconnected from their targeted problems?
We have a very siloed world, and that's not new to our industry either. Silos are going to happen. If you study psychology, you know 109 people that are doing the same thing become a silo, whether you want them to or not. You can't break them down. Everybody says, let's break down the silos. You're smoking crack. I'm sorry. It's just not a thing. It's not a thing. I think what we have a hard time with in our industry especially is building the bridges between those silos so that we can come together and we can meet in the middle and talk, and creating the events to do it. We say we have the bridge built. We say we're open to talking to somebody on the other silo, but we're not creating the events or the activities for it to actually happen. That's like me saying, all right, well, I bought a gym membership. That counts. Well, no.
But you didn't do the work.
No, because I'm not going to the gym. There's nothing that's drawing me to the gym. Now, if I have a calendar entry that says, hey, Michelle, you're supposed to be at the gym 3 days a week, maybe at least there's something to trigger me. But it's easy to miss that. If I sign up for a class or I have a personal trainer, all these things increase the chance to actually use the gym membership. Same thing. We can have the bridges there. We can have the communication lines open. But if we're not creating regular events where we come together and we talk and we meet in the middle, then we're going to struggle.
Let's say, going back to the gym membership, let's say that it's really hard to get that going. When you start to see results, do you think people are more motivated to be innovative?
Absolutely. Because we know it takes a while before we see the results, just like at the gym. So what do gyms do? They start telling stories of somebody who did it successfully, and you get inspired by that, and that can help during this little bit of time. So I think we have to share our lessons learned stories. We have to share where we heard something and we made a change based on what we heard when we met at that event on our bridge. Or sometimes we expected to have a change from one silo. We met on the bridge, and actually we found out that the other silo realized they were the ones who needed to change. But we need those stories to inspire us until we start seeing change. Once we start getting value and seeing the change, we're already motivated to continue.
And then we can just keep going.
Yeah.
Michelle, if I were to hand you the microphone right now and I said, what would you like to tell the industry about innovation and innovation disconnects? What would you tell
I
them?
would say we all have a hand in improving how we run our clinical trials. It all starts with I. So what can I do to make it better? And we each have the power to reach out and become a bridge somewhere else and create an event for people on each side of that bridge to come together. So how are you going to create those bridges? How are you going to create those events? And when are you going to do it?
In that case, there really is an I in team, isn't there?
There is.
And if you make enough bridges, you're just going to have the giant matrix of bridges everywhere.
I can imagine it being almost like you can have this funny little slide thing where you can slide from one to the next, to the next, to the next, and you pick up speed as you go and everybody hops on board, and it's great. It's wonderful.
It's just one giant current on the river.
Yeah.
Michelle, thank you for coming on to CRPN Central. Excellent interview.
Really excited to be here. It's a great conversation, and you're just fabulous to talk to anyways.
Well, thank you. All right, I will talk to you soon.
All right, thanks so much. Have a great day.
All right, bye. Henry and his team at Clinically work with clinical research sites as their primary, secondary, and tertiary stakeholders to ensure optimal product development and delivery. His team is not afraid to visit sites, ask the questions, and develop solutions that are tailored to their operational needs. It's still a mystery to comprehend that we as research experts develop the latest in medical technology and communicate our results with carbon copies and fax machines. And whether it's through evolutions or revolutions, we as human beings would benefit greatly by assigning duplicative and repetitive tasks to computers so we may focus on higher work order thinking. Need is the mother of invention, and to prevent undesirable and unintended consequences, it's imperative to understand side effects of our developments and avoid over-standardization. We should innovate through specialization. Don't reinvent the wheel. Focus on our core competencies. Communicate problems to vendors, not solutions. And like the internet's innovative boom in our society, create a series of universally accepted protocols that do not rigidly establish barriers to collaborations, but rather lay a general foundation to build and innovate upon. Michelle has worked at site, CRO, and sponsor levels and has now become a professional innovator to empower our industry's creative leaders to be their best by thinking and listening with each other. Innovations must be valuable, creative, and they must satisfy unmet needs. They must also be scalable, cost-effective, and implementable if they hope to have a chance to succeed. Innovate in what you do's developmental pillars: intention, ideation, incubation, and implementation, combined with a solid change management foundation, helps our industry to reduce permanent and unbalanced burden quotas. It fosters helpful and constructive conversations. It applies stress tests in safe environments, and it de-risks each innovation for optimal results. Silos are human and unavoidable. However, through diligently managed OKRs, rather than fixed and misdirected KPIs, and constructed bridges between each of our silos, we have the opportunity to create collaborative events to encourage lasting and synergistic innovations for everyone involved. Both interviews confirmed successful innovations require due diligence and open dialogue with all of an innovation's stakeholders, and both also validate that staying closed-minded or unaware of the ecosystem as a whole will doom the innovation through limited adoption and abandonment. And complementary to Henry's analogy of universally adopted protocols to establish innovation foundations, Michelle believes that each of our silos may construct collaborative bridges to understand each of our needs for synergistic improvements. So, how do we approach, develop, and foster innovations to be successful in such a complex industry environment? Combined, our guests' answers confirmed the most important variables to promote an innovation's success are transparent communication, complete collaboration, and laser focus. Understand your targeted problems completely, not just for a single point of view, but holistically across an entire ecosystem. Rely on your specialties and on the specialties of each other, and do not lose sight of your target direction. However, learn and pivot quickly to adapt to the ever-changing needs of your dependent stakeholders. Combined, if we maintain focus, share our ideas, and work together, perhaps we will see far more innovative wins in our operations and improve how we enhance healthcare for generations to come. Thank you again for tuning in to today's innovation exploration. Just imagine what we as an industry could do if we could adapt and revolutionize our technologies and processes as rapidly as the medical innovations we are testing. Thank you to Henry and Michelle for sharing their time and experiences today. Thank you to our community voice volunteers, Naor, Chazan, and Esther Howard, for participating in today's introductory skit. Finally, thank you to MedVector Peterson Research Consulting, and to Great Lakes Research Network for helping to make this podcast possible. A reminder, please join our Voice of Change at the Save Our Sites Conference, February 2nd, 2024, Tucson, Arizona. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time on CRPN Central.